Now it's time for another Board Game Brawl preview with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game that will soon be coming to Kickstarter. That game is called Immortal, and it's from Game-o-Gami. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, when the Kickstarter launches, I'm going to have a link at the bottom of the screen, and then down at the description section of the video, and then also at the end of the video, I'll have a link as well. That is going to take you to the Kickstarter project page when it launches. You can find out more information and hopefully consider backing Immortal. Now, this is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players, where each player represents a different pantheon of gods. It's Ragnarok. The final war has begun for the souls of all the people on Earth. So you have the American pantheon, which is like a Native American deities. You have the Norse pantheon, the Japanese pantheon, and the Greek pantheon. They're all going at it, and you're doing this mechanically through different boards that you're going to strategically place at the beginning of the game, and then playing cards onto that board representing the different followers of these gods. Let me go ahead and give you a brief overview of how the game is going to work using a prototype version of the game. So a lot of the things that you see may not be final. Then we're going to come back and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, this is a beginning setup for 2 players in Immortal. Now, the goal of Immortal is to have more troops on the field than your opponent at the end of the game. That signifies your pantheon of gods dominating the other gods and taking over the immortal realms. Now, the most important thing about the setup are the boards. There are 4 boards out here right now because you're going to have 2 boards per player. So this is a 2-player setup, and therefore there's 4 boards. How this is going to work is that each player in turn order, no matter how many players you have, is going to take a board and put it out on there. And when the first player puts out a board, they just put it however they want. But from then on, you have to follow a certain orientation. You have to have like edges against like edges, and you can decide whether or not you're going to put on the alpha side, which are these sort of the tan sides here, which are kind of generic, for lack of a better word. They don't have anything that's special about them. Or you can put them on the omega side, which are these marble-looking sides here. Those have sacred spaces. Sacred spaces are these areas that look different than the others, and there are actually dominion spaces and ability spaces. I'll get back to those in a minute. Each player is also going to take control of one of the decks of the pantheons of gods. There are 4 pantheons in the core set of Immortal. There is American, Norse, Greek, and Japanese. You're going to take the entire deck for the pantheon that you choose, and you and the players decide how you're going to choose them. However, at the beginning of the game, you only have access to the level 1 cards from your pantheon. You're going to shuffle those up and put them off to the side. You're going to put the level 2 and level 3 cards off to the side for Act 2 of the game, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. You're also going to take a number of control tokens, or all of the control tokens of a certain color. You use control tokens to signify cards that belong to you out on the battlefield, just so it's easier for people to remember that rather than just referring to the card art and what's on there. Now, I have a unit for each of the 2 players in this game already out on the field, but how you would actually do this, only in the beginning, is each player would go around in turn order, placing a card from one of the level 1 cards face down onto the board. You'll have 5 cards in hand at the start of the game, then you're going to put one face down, then you'll draw another one to replace that, so you bring yourself back up to 5. Once everyone has placed a card face down, you will flip them up. Now, orientation in this game is incredibly important. Each of the cards, in one of the big main central points of the game, is that there's card orientation north, south, east, and west. So whatever orientation you choose, it's going to be oriented like that for the rest of the game. So let me go ahead and show you some of the cards from each of the different pantheons. And for the first card I'll show you, I'll actually break down the different things that you're going to see on the card. So let me focus in a bit on that. This is one of the American Pantheon's cards, the Whirlwind. Now keep in mind that some of the cards I'm going to show you, the artwork is not final. Some of them it is, some of them they're not. So just keep that in mind. Some artwork may change, or the names on the cards may change corresponding to the artwork. So obviously the most important thing here are the cardinal directions. These are the directions of the cards. You orient it however you choose to determine which side is north, but then that is going to represent the strength of the card in those 4 directions. So whenever you're combating another card in that particular direction, that's the number that you're going to use. The 2 main symbols here are abilities that this card can activate and Dominion abilities of the card. Dominion and abilities, well, I'll get back to the abilities in a minute because those correspond to the sacred spaces on the board, but the Dominion spaces also correspond to this symbol. There's 3 different symbols: Earth, Sky, and Sea, and those are actually going to give you bonuses if your character is on a corresponding Dominion space. So, for instance, out here you see there is I believe, the Sky symbol out there already. Down in the bottom corner, it just reminds you what faction or pantheon this character corresponds to, the Dominion symbol, and then this is the level of the card. Remember, you start off with level 1 cards, but you may get up to level 2 and level 3 cards when you get to Act 2. That matters as far as when you can gain them, but also during battles as well, which I'll get back to. And just to show you some of these other ones, here's Dear Woman. It's got the temp art symbol on it, Uktena, and the Great Spirit. And I'll show you some of the Norse, or I'm sorry, yeah, this is the Norse pantheon. You have the Valkyries, which I really love that artwork, actually. Hel, or Heel, and Thor, of course, there has to be a Thor. And, oh, Fenrir, there's another one from the Norse mythology. You always got to show a dog. And then we have the Greek pantheon. You have Medusa and Athena, Aphrodite, and Zeus. Notice that their symbols and strength changes, and remember, these are different levels, so obviously Zeus has quite a bit more power in some of his directions because he is Zeus after all. And the last one, the Japanese pantheon, you have Hachiman and the Kitsune, the Ryujin, and Komainu. Now, these are just a few of the cards for each of these factions. I don't want to show you every single one just to keep the suspense for the final game, but those are a few just to give you a taste of what the artwork is like and what you can expect. Now, okay, first off, just to clarify something I just recalled, the ability icons that appear on a character card are actually their ability. They're always going to have that ability. But if their card is on one of the ability spaces that has symbols that correspond to all the different abilities in the game, then whether that card has that ability or not, they now gain it by virtue of being on that space, in addition to their other abilities. If they happen to be on one of the Dominion spaces, if they match up with that space as far as their Dominion icon, then one of the 3 icons, then they're going to get a +1 that they'll actually, so let's say this guy happens to be associated with that Dominion, so he's going to go ahead and gain a +1 while he's on that space. There's also other abilities that may give penalties, a -1, which we'll use these markers for as well. Now, there is such a thing as void spaces in this game. Void spaces would be spaces along the outskirts of the board. There are a special ability called Void Walker that will let cards actually occupy those spaces, but that is not the norm. Usually you must place your cards on the actual spaces of the game boards. All right, so let me just run you through how the rounds are going to go in this game. The first thing you do on your turn is you're going to play a card from your hand. You have to play it with your orientation in mind, however you've oriented north as, and play it into an open space. Then you resolve any pre-attack abilities. Now, I just placed that there, but let's say you wanted to attack the enemy unit. Let's go ahead and say that the enemy unit was right here, and I really wanted to attack on my turn. This would be very foolish, so don't do what I'm about to do, but because their strengths are way out of whack. But if I wanted to attack this card, I would literally place the card right next to them, adjacent, which is going to be one of the 4 cardinal directions. Pre-attack abilities would happen first, what if either of the characters had those abilities that take place before battle, like giving bonuses or penalties. And then you would resolve the attacks, which is very simply comparing the directional numbers of the 2 characters, north versus south, and so on, to see who has a higher number and any strategic abilities that you may be able to use at this time. If your strength is greater than the defender's strength, then it's successful and the defending card is actually captured. By the way, so I would have one of my control markers on this card, and then I would actually get to gain control of that card as well. I've captured it. However, if it was the other way around, if I had just failed in my attack, then just nothing happens. The defender doesn't take control of the attacker's card. After that, you would resolve any kind of post-attack abilities or reaction abilities. So for instance, one of the abilities is Swift, which lets you immediately move to another open space and so on. And the last thing you're going to do on your turn is simply draw another card from your deck. This is going to continue. This whole thing is called the battle phase, with players taking their turns back and forth. And this is going to continue until you have either filled up every space on the board, which I'm not really going to do. I'm just putting out some more stuff for reference here. Or until one player can no longer draw any cards from their deck of level 1 cards. When that happens, sorry, I'm probably not orienting these the right way. When one of those conditions is met, that is the end of Act 1. You count up all the cards on the battlefield. Whoever has the most cards is going to be the winner of Act 1, but the game is not over. Instead, you're going to keep everything the same out here as it is. The Act 1 characters stay out there, maintaining any abilities that they have, their enduring abilities. Then you're going to go to the new round, and the player who won the first act is going to take the first turn of that game. But before you do that, you actually have more setup. You're going to add more boards out to the battlefield. Every player gets to add an additional board because you're making more space for the new warriors who will be coming out. And speaking of that, that's the other bit of setup. You're going to take that deck of level 2 and level 3 characters that you haven't had access to yet. You're going to shuffle up the 3s, put them face down. Then you're going to shuffle up the 2s, put them on top of the 3s, and that is your new battle deck for the last battle phase of the game, which is also called Ragnarok, appropriately enough. Then the game is going to continue as it was before. There's no more placing cards face down like you did at the start of Act 1, and there's no more deciding orientation. You just keep battling it out until, again, one of those conditions is met where someone cannot draw any more cards or the battlefield is full up. That is the final match of the game, and that is when you're going to look at the battlefield, determine who has the most cards out there, taking into, and you've been using all your different special abilities, placing out cards, putting out your 2s and 3s, and using the abilities of your level 1s possibly. Whoever has done this the best and most efficiently and has been able to dominate the battlefield and have the most troops at the end is going to be the winner of Immortal. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. One of the biggest selling points for Immortal is the theme itself. The fact that you have these groups of gods who are fighting against each other using their followers as well, and they have an escalating amount of power as you go through the different acts. And then you have the presentation as well, where you have this beautiful artwork and graphic design married together with that theme. It just comes across really well and is going to appeal to a lot of people. And then when you get into the game mechanisms, it's interesting because you have both the idea of putting out the boards at the beginning of the game, building the battlefield, which all the players that are involved in the game have a say in how that works, whether you're using the normal side or the alpha side or the omega side with the different special abilities, and placing them in a way that's strategic for you, but knowing that the other players are doing that as well. And then, of course, placing down your actual units, the cards, onto the battlefield, first face down at the beginning, but then face up for the rest of the game, trying to strategically outwit your opponent, placing them in such a way that benefits you the most, taking advantage of those sacred spots on the board. So, while there's a lot going on, there's different stats on all the cards. Different cards have different strengths, as do the pantheons. Each have their own different special abilities and that they utilize in different ways, with each card's having its own strengths depending on the different directions. Despite all of that, the game is still very easy to learn, very accessible to a lot of people, and so I think it's going to have a broad appeal because there is some deep strategy there to be had with the card play on the boards, but also anyone can get into it and get good at the game within a matter of time. When you add that together with the theme of having these different pantheons to these different cultures, the American, the Norse, Japanese, and Greek mythology, it's just a really interesting concept that I think a lot of people can get behind. And if you're someone who thinks that that's interesting, if you want to find out even more about Immortal, I would encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter page when the game launches. When it does launch, I'll have the link at the bottom of the screen and then down in the description section of the video. That will take you to the page. You can find out more information, and hopefully you'll consider backing Immortal. That is Immortal from Game-o-Gami. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.